The fact that we are in the midst of this cost of living crisis, which is entirely artificial. It has been created by reckless policy over the past few years.
I said, what's that mean? He says, it means you have more cash. I was shocked. I call that an Easter egg.
Everybody knows tax codes are complicated. They have to be complicated, but they don't have to be overly complicated.
Biden's budget proposal contains many new tax provisions. Does any particular proposal stick out as being the worst for small business?
There's about a lot of bad options to pick from. It's hard to pick one of them.
My regulatory expenses have gone up over 460% in the last 8 years.
Under the Inflation Reduction Act has greatly enhanced inflation in these United States of America?
Yes, it should be called the Inflation Creation Act. The administration has also talked about taxing unrealized gains.
Policies have consequences.
And I will now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness here with us today is Dr. Hedlund. Dr. Hedlund is an associate professor of economics at the Daniel School of Business at Purdue University. Our next witness here with us today is Mr. Raymond Huff. Mr. Huff is the president of HJB Convenience Corporation located in Lakewood, Colorado. Now, our next witness today is Chuck Wetherington. Mr. Wetherington is the president of BTET Technologies located in Hanover, Maryland. Can you discuss how you were able to utilize the 199A small business deduction to grow your business, and more generally, what you do when you are able to keep more of your hard-earned money?
In my case, I wasn't up on tax law, and my CPA in 2019 called and says, you invested in equipment and did a self-serve store, and the 199A and the bonus depreciation is available to you. I said, what's that mean? He says, it means you have more cash. I was shocked. I call that an Easter egg. I did not know that was going to be the effect. Doing that, having that extra funds, I then invested in 2019 in additional technology that actually paid to keep my stores open during the COVID times. So the 199A and the bonus depreciation helped me tremendously in those 2 years.
So, Mr. Hedlund, can you elaborate on how simplifying the tax code helps both American families and businesses thrive?
Absolutely. This is a critical task, and it's made more critical by the fact that we are in the midst of this cost of living crisis, which is entirely artificial. It has been created by reckless policy over the past few years. And I'll return to one of my remarks, which is that tax simplification is deregulation. Tax simplification is tax fairness. Right? Fairness is about a level playing field where you don't have to hire teams of accountants and lawyers to do your taxes, but it's a lot simpler. And the TCJA helped with that, for one, by doubling the standard deduction. So prior to TCJA, 50% of joint filers itemized their taxes. They had to go through and look at all the receipts and look at what gets deducted. After TCJA, it fell to 12%. Right? That benefits small business owners as well. So this is why we need to start with extending TCJA and go further than that.
We consider tax reform over the next 2 years. What can we do to restore trust in the system and deliver benefits for true small businesses?
Thank you for that question. Everybody knows tax codes are complicated. They have to be complicated, but they don't have to be overly complicated. I believe that things like depreciation, quick depreciation, immediate depreciation, is essential for small businesses to survive. There's no question, almost everybody in the business community would say that. What I think I disagree with is the idea that the tax code itself, what the rate of taxation is for a business, is the most important thing to that business. Because the reality is, businesses only pay that when they're making profit. So I, for one, since 2020, haven't made any money. So the tax rate that I'm paying right now doesn't mean a thing to me. Depreciating means a thing to me. Interest rates means things to me, but the tax rate doesn't. So focusing just on tax rate doesn't make sense to most small businesses, because most small businesses actually are not making a lot of money.
Mr. Huff, I'm curious. You've heard that some of the criticism on the TCJA was just a bailout for wealthy corporations and one percenters. You've talked about how that has benefited you. Do you feel like your business falls into either one of those two categories?
Which were the categories again?
Well, that you are a wealthy corporation or a wealthy one percenter.
No, I'm definitely not either. I'm a small business owner who goes to work every day and trying to make a dollar and pay my employees and grow my business. I would like one day to be wealthy in those things.
But it's great to hear that we actually are hearing from small business owners, mom and pop shops and others, who have actually been able to take advantage of the TCJA. Mr. Hedlund, I'm going to ask you, President Biden's budget proposal contains many new tax provisions. Does any particular proposal stick out as being the worst for small business?
There's a lot of bad options to pick from. It's hard to pick one of them. But I'd say the worst thing we could do for the economy right now is to hike taxes when people have already been paying the inflation tax and the regulatory tax. It would make the cost of living crisis worse, make our growth worse, and not be good for the economy.
So you've heard President Biden repeatedly state that he is not going to tax anyone making less than $400,000. Is that accurate?
Well, that promise has already been broken. As I mentioned, the inflation tax. The typical American family has seen their real income fall by $4,000 because of inflation. And that will just be compounded by the expiration of thousands of dollars worth of tax cuts to them if that were to be allowed to happen.
How would higher taxes impact, because you talked about how we're competing with other countries and other businesses outside of America. Can you tell me how higher taxes impact manufacturing?
So the vast majority of small and medium manufacturers are actually suppliers to larger employers. So even though we may be not necessarily Main Street, but small industrial parks around the United States, that higher tax rate has a trickle-down effect. And we've seen a real renaissance in reshoring of manufacturing in the United States, and I think the tax code has been a big piece of that. Not only the supply chain problems for the pandemic, but it was already starting before then in 2018 and 2019 because of the improved tax code.
Outside the tax code, can you talk about how the regulations have been hurting your business? And we've got 10 seconds.
My regulatory expenses have gone up over 460% in the last 8 years, and not done anything to make the products better or safer.
What changes would you like to see? What avenues are already there, and how can we use this to our advantage?
So I think some of the things we've talked about today that actually are still in the TCJA, I would absolutely encourage to stay in. So things like having the being able to write off quickly, things like, the two things that are the most important things for me with employees is healthcare and childcare. Yeah. If we could have better healthcare and childcare programs, that would make an enormous difference for the vast majority of small businesses that I'm familiar with.
If Congress allows the provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to expire, what will be the impact on American businesses?
That's a great question, and it would be a very damaging impact, because we saw what positive progress that law provided. $5,000 plus in income gains for the typical family, with bigger gains at the bottom. People with less formal education, people with non-managerial jobs, people at the lower end of the income distribution had faster gains than at the top. So if we let the TCJA expire, we can expect to see less investment, lower wages, and lower overall prosperity.
With research and development, is it true that our tax code now is punishing people who do research and development, and if we don't make changes, we're going to see America fall further behind the rest of the world in research? What do you say to that, Mr. Wetherington?
That's absolutely true. Manufacturers are inherently problem solvers, but we want to focus our problem solving on things about what we're manufacturing. We don't want to focus our problem solving on a new tax code or on changes. So it's predictability and consistency that we really need out of Washington. Allows us to focus on the job we need to do, not only in creating new products through R&D, but also on the daily building, making, shipping, supporting products that we make to help people get better in our healthcare system.
Tit for. So we've got to act, or we're going to go further behind the rest of the world.
The priority is urgent.
Amen. No, thank you for saying that. Mr. Huff, I just want to say thank you and congratulations to you. 7 stores. I know your family's proud. 16 people are getting a paycheck. They're putting dinner on their table because of you. Isn't it true that spending $1.3 trillion under the Inflation Reduction Act has greatly enhanced inflation in these United States of America?
Yes, it should be called the Inflation Creation Act.
Thank you very much.
How would small business owners, and especially the smallest and most underserved, stand to benefit if Congress finally moves past the TCJA and instead pursues a fairer tax system?
So we can talk about what fair means. And I think that we believe as small business owners that if everybody is doing the same thing and paying the same amounts, that's fair. The fact is that the corporate tax rate had been at between 30, the top rate had been around 35 to 39%, and a 40% reduction took it to 20%, 21%. The small business community only got a 20% deduction as a pass-through. And you just look at those numbers, and any economist and any layperson can understand that that wasn't fair. And the fact that one was permanent, one was not permanent, was also not fair.
Speaking of the 20% reduction, A, what if that never occurred? And B, how devastating is it going to be if that gets eliminated?
Well, I can testify today that for the first time, the 199A actually brought funds to my corporation that I was able to invest, and I believe that if I didn't have that, I would not be here sitting here today as a business person. It gave enough funds that I was able to invest in technology and open up self-serve stores that are still currently operating.
Mr. Hedlund, you in your work, and you're working on the TCJA, just related to inflation, when the former administration, Trump administration, was talking about tariffs and getting to 0% tariffs and reciprocal tariffs, was there inflation back in the Trump days because of that?
Leaving 2020, inflation was under 2%. It wasn't until 2022 that we got to 40-year high inflation.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
It does seem pretty straightforward, and the American people are clear. Make those who are super wealthy pay all their taxes on all their income and wealth, and then put us in a position where we can invest in childcare and healthcare and more tax relief for small businesses.
We keep going back to bipartisan tax reform, and gosh, all of us would like that to happen. The question becomes what's fair. And again, what I say is the small business community that we represent is not coming today to say we don't want the changes that the TCJA gave to the small business community in deductions, in the pass-through 20%. It's not like we don't want those. Those were helpful, absolutely. Yeah. We all accept that.
Yeah, exactly.
But the bottom line is that the small business community is basically being taxed at about a 28% rate. And we also know that the corporations are being taxed at the 21% rate.
If.
And the average corporate tax rate is closer to 10%.
Correct.
So that's not, in the American eye, fair.
Mr. Huff, one of the most important pieces of the TCJA was a small business deduction. It allowed a 20% deduction for pass-through business owners, allowing them to keep more of their own money and invest it in their businesses and in their employees. It's led to an estimated $66 billion in tax savings for small entities. Mr. Huff, what will happen to your small business if the small business deduction expires next year, sir?
I will not be able to invest in my planned reopening of my stores. I have stores that are actually mothballed and plan to reopen as the office buildings fill up. And just one other thing, the 199A was the first time that I actually felt that the tax code affected me as a small business person. I'm grateful to have it.
These savings that you're realizing under the tax cuts now, you're not taking fancy trips to Tahiti or anything like that, are you? With the money?
Actually, I'm going to go to Tahiti, but not because of the tax code.
So. You are investing this in your business and the people who work for you.
That's absolutely correct. We reinvest in our business, and I actually have to do that because I'd like to get back to 23 stores across the United States.
Mr. Hedlund, our farmers are the backbone of our nation, working sun up to sundown. In Missouri, we had 5 years ago 95,000 farms in Missouri. Now we're down to 87,000. Our food security is our national security. We're losing 1,000 farms a month in America. And a key policy keeping these businesses, these family farms going, is the stepped-up basis, which allows a son or daughter to inherit their family farm without paying the devastating tax bill. President Biden wants to do away with this in his budget, and it's going to hit two-thirds adversely, two-thirds of the family farms. What impact will that have on our ag industry, do you think?
It'd be a very damaging impact. We've seen overall prices go up by 20%, and food prices have gone up by more than that. And that's just part of a trend. This administration has also talked about taxing unrealized gains, which would be similarly devastating to the economy.
What can we do to cater benefits more towards the average small business owner who makes closer to $70,000 a year?
So one of our proposals is to take the first $25,000 worth of income on a business and make it tax free. Give small business owners who begin to hire employees a credit for new hires, things like that. So when you're down at the level where all entrepreneurs start at the bottom and build up, give better tax breaks and incentives that way.
Mr. Hedlund, so you're from Purdue. Sorry about the game the other night. A vast majority, you guys finished second in the world. That's very good.
A lot better than last year.
Yes, sir. A vast majority, I understand, of small businesses are pass-through entities, meaning income is reported on from the business owner on their individual taxes and is taxed under the individual income tax. Is that correct?
That is correct.
This means the limitation in the personal income tax code, like the SALT cap, directly negatively impacts the business. Is that correct?
They are affected by that provision.
And it's a negative impact. They get to deduct less.
They get to deduct less.
Which means they have to pay more.
Sure.
And does anybody want to pay more?
No one I've encountered.
Okay. We agree on that. Would you agree, moving on, would you agree that a double tax, where the federal government and then later on the state and local governments tax the same income, that a double tax is unfair?
So I would take a little bit of a different view there. I would say if there's a federal taxpayer living in Texas and one living in New York and they have the same income, that the one in Texas should not have to pay a higher federal tax because of the bad decisions that New York government is making.
Great point. I've heard that from some of my colleagues. Now, what would you say about return on investment? If you're going to analyze, in your words, that a Texas taxpayer, God bless Texas, shouldn't have to subsidize the largesse of Albany politicians. I generally agree with that concept. But what would you say if the analysis then said that this town sends more back to Texas and some other states than they send back to New York based upon the revenue it collects from those? Specifically, New York State is a donor state, meaning that for every dollar a New York taxpayer sends to the federal government, we get a mere 85 cents back. In many of those same states who claim they're subsidizing my state's largesse, they're getting $1.25, $1.50, and $2. Would you say that's unfair, sir?
I'd say that the money going back to a lot of these states, no one's really feeling the benefits of it. Government's way too big. So I'm 100% on board with you about we need to reduce the tax burden on everybody.
Great. Let's talk about the marriage penalty real quick. So certain parts of the tax code disincentivize marriage, and specifically with respect to the most recent adjustment in the SALT code, the limitation is $10,000 regardless if you're an individual or you're married. So one person gets to deduct $10,000 from their taxes, but two people who happen to be married get to deduct the same $10,000, not $20,000. Is that fair, sir?
I'm definitely against marriage penalties.
Mr. Rowen, what are some of the provisions in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that helped small businesses that you would like to see continued in a new tax package?
Well, I do think the 199A 20% reduction was good. I think the 100% amortizing, taking those deductions right away, those are good. There's a lot of provisions. Anything that simplifies the tax code would be great. But again, we do believe that if you simply leave this law in place and keep the corporate rate at 21% and give back to the small businesses their 20% reduction, you're still creating this uneven balance where small businesses are effectively being taxed at somewhere around 28%. And corporations are still at 21%.
So could you highlight for us some specific industries that saw the most growth after the 2017 adoption, and then just speak to sectors where you foresee continued growth if we can come together on extending these important provisions?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the great thing about tax relief and a more competitive tax code is that it advantages all industries. Right? There are too many policies where, unfortunately, the government ends up picking winners and losers and would go for this industry, not that industry. But what we actually saw was all industries gaining. We saw a lot of investment throughout the country. And as you pointed out, it benefited especially blue-collar workers. And that's the thing with tax policy. It's not just the immediate dollars that the tax cuts themselves put in the pockets of people. It's the fact that it creates growth. And that growth has massive benefits.
Could you speak to the impact on your business and some of the decisions you would have to make should that sunset?
If this the 199A and the bonus depreciation changes, based upon my projections, rather than opening 9 stores in the next 3 years, I'll be only able to open 1 or 2 stores in the next 2 years.
Hector.
Policies have consequences. When there's a high tax rate, large employers moved offshored their manufacturing jobs. The lower tax rate, large employers started reshoring. It was going great before COVID. With COVID came the supply chain issues. It continues to go strong. We've got to keep these tax codes where they are.
So really thinking about ways that we can encourage a tax policy that prioritizes investment in human capital, in people, and not just a churn of stuff. And I'm wondering, to that end, who could speak on what they've seen that does prioritize investment in people, in tradespeople?
Well, I would say that human capital investment is one of the most important types of investment, and it is not talked about enough. Right? We need a tax code that is overall pro-investment, and the challenge with steep tax penalties that are better now than they used to be, but we can make them even better, is that they discourage people from investing in themselves. Because work is not just the paycheck you're immediately earning, it's the investment in your own future capacity. So if we have simple, low, and fair taxes, we can get a lot more of that.
And something like a small business tax cut for the first employee that they hire, or if they send one of their employees to schools, or you're just training somebody on site. There used to be programs for workforce development years ago that had tax incentives. There's all sorts of things that can be done that small business folks will take advantage of.
As I open stores, I have to hire a manager, assistant manager. I have to hire associates. It's really critical that we continue to come up with tax policies that allow small businesses to grow, because that's where the growth in employment is really happening, is in the small businesses.
And if there's no further business objection, the committee is adjourned.